Hello everyone, welcome to LEGO Rewind, where we take another look at old retired LEGO themes. I don't know if you've noticed, but I like the sea. Whether it be in games, movies, toys, or comics, it's never long before it's on my mind again. Part of that is because I've grown up so close to it, and there's something humbling about living at the very edge of man's world, close enough to set foot into the next, peel the veil away and immerse oneself in it, but only go so far. It's a dangerous realm for us rather fragile humans to enter. I think that's part of what makes underwater themes some of the most enduring LEGO's ever made. The idea of hopping into some futuristic sub and encountering who knows what down there, being able to explore that other world so far away with its inherently dreamlike quality that makes it so easy to play around with. Let's begin that journey with my most requested subject after Exoforce, 1995's Aquazone. This is the first underwater focused theme LEGO ever made, and right away those backgrounds set a really effective mood. Some of them have actual props and displays in the foreground. That's something I miss. Everything's rendered these days. The first two teams introduced were the Aquanauts and Aqua Sharks, who competed over, you guessed it, crystals. I think this might be one of the first times we saw that now overused plot device. The Aquanauts' vehicles were rather grounded and utilitarian compared to their enemies, whose more streamlined ships were outfitted to look like giant sharks. I've always loved this idea. What better way to intimidate someone than by making them feel like they're actually being attacked by a giant sea monster? The pirates in my series apply this design philosophy to basically everything they build, though I didn't get that idea from Aquazone. Looking back, I guess it's one of those things that's pretty universal among humans. An old fear left over from the hunter-gatherer days that may have once saved our lives from something in the water and will probably always lurk within us, and Aquazone's set designers expertly exploited that. Something you'll notice is really common in similar themes is the strong presence of yellow. It's a happy color to set against the mostly blue and often dark backgrounds, and while the trans-orange and trans-blue parts add a pinch of sci-fi flair, they're really not that far off from the vehicles we have today. They remind me a lot of the Ice Planet crew having a similar working man feel. They even have the same magnets. By contrast, the Aqua Sharks' black and blue ships blend in with the depths like a stealthy predator, even though their own trans-orange highlights kinda give them away. Normally you might not think those orange bits would look right on yellow, but they weirdly make it work. In fact, Aquazone in general feels like a sub-theme of LEGO Space, basically just the same spaceships but underwater. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I could just as easily see these in our own sea as Europa or some other world, and I think that nautical facelift just makes these even more unique. Even the name Aquanaut has a great ring to it, like astronaut. One thing you have to appreciate about these days is the frequency and sheer volume of new sets we get. Bi-yearly releases, summer waves, winter waves, maybe some extra things in between, polybags. Back then you may have only seen a few new sets from your favorite theme per year, but on the flip side, they might be on shelves for longer before being discontinued, so that must have been nice. The first two teams were discontinued after a couple years and would soon be replaced by two new teams, but 1997 saw the weird intervention of another team that really didn't leave much impact. The Aqua Raiders, not to be confused with the other Aqua Raiders, only got 3 sets. In all fairness, these had a pretty distinct look too, black and green and neon. These were the most industrial looking. Sure, they had big scary eyes painted on, but they were mainly built for digging, not so much fighting. That would be next year's Stingrays. Now these guys had a strong look, a harsh mix of gray, brown, black, red, and a slathering of neon green. Gone were the sharks. These were bigger, more fearsome. This lobster's claw is literally knives. That's wicked. And the pilots were freaks. Sure, they were already scary enough with those red eyes and their medieval-style helmets, but take them off and by the pit, put it back on! If 2005 was the peak of LEGO's edgy teenager phase and 2010 was the end of it with Bionicle's cancellation, I like to think this was the beginning of it. These are seriously some of the most intimidating LEGO sets I've ever seen. The Hydronauts, by comparison, were kinda bland, switching out the orange and blue for green and gray? They were good, just somehow less whimsical than the Aquanauts. Aquazone was a heck of a theme, but like many, it ended rather quietly with a single runoff set in 1999. If you really want to be blown away, just look up Aquazone mocks and see what people are inspired to create. I wasn't kidding when I said it's not unlike a space theme, and when people give it that kind of scale, oh man, this is why I do this. Before Aquazone ended, there was a similar line in 97, a town sub-theme simply called LEGO Divers. This probably explains why there were so few Aquazone sets that year. You don't want two of basically the same line competing with each other. Divers had a more welcoming atmosphere, with the surface always within reach. The vehicles were similar to the Aquanauts, but with red and light trans-blue, and boats and stationary bases that were blue and white. It's a nice distinction. There was a much bigger focus on terrain, bits of the ocean floor with seaweed, coral, and plenty of animals. Sometimes they just print fish on the rocks. And yes, the infamous Big Ugly Rock Piece! Or burp was still relatively new at this time. People hate these pieces to this day, but they have a good use. It'd be one thing if they really were just huge featureless blocks that didn't have any studs, but there's plenty of room to build upon these things as a base for larger, more intricate structures. And just look at that brick-built skeleton, that is beautiful. I had one of these sets, this one. It was probably the best choice if you could only ever have one, with a good-sized submarine build that's pretty flawless. A few minifigs, a base plate with terrain, a stingray, that other thing, and all for $20. 11 sets is pretty good for a one-off, but this too had an extra set the year after, and it's an interesting look at how this line could have continued. The yellow and red reversed would have been cool to see on a new line of vehicles. Maybe someday. I'm only going to gloss over Mission Deep Sea since I already covered it in the Alpha Team episode. I will say it's interesting to see the line's equivalent of an Aquashark sub in 2002's rounder, newer style. But around this time, most of the elements that made Aquazone unique were being retired. Remember what I said about new management last episode? They made the move to scrap hundreds of unique elements from the time, maybe even more. Take it from a Bionicle junkie. I know the pain of seeing so many of your favorite parts sunsetted. Even entire colors would be retired. Like I said in the Studios episode, those chrome or rather silver spears from Aquazone were on their way out. It's funny looking back and seeing how proud LEGO was to show off their silver pieces before, only to forget them. The old style gray would soon be replaced with a new bluish gray that would stand the test of time better. See, the old gray tends to yellow over the years, changing from a rather neutral shade to a weird greenish brown that I've seen people use to make tanks and other things the color probably wasn't intended for. I do like the new bluish Metro Gray more, but I also think the old gray worked better for some things like the Stingrays, bleeding into the red and brown to make them overall more oppressing. Very bleak, you know? Funnily enough, while the chrome spears may be long gone, I see them pop up in knockoff brands these days. It's like peering into an alternate timeline. The very last LEGO theme to feature them, and one of the last to feature magnets, was Aqua Raiders. Not that one. This really was the end of some things, a send-off to that old style of LEGO. The vehicles were pretty standard, more the same really. If you liked Aquazone, Divers, or Alpha Team, you were gonna like these. What really set this line apart were the more authentic looking sea creatures. Giant sharks, anglers, crabs, you name it. Story's pretty simple. The Raiders were looking for treasure in the Bermuda Triangle, and well, they found more than they bargained for. That's a pretty good justification for these animals being so big given their realistic colors not making them obviously mutants or whatever. Like the triangle is a sanctuary for these larger-than-life beasts. This is basically what I was asking for LEGO's dinosaurs to be. Brick-built, but still pretty lifelike. You can see them, there's a dude who's been digested. Jeez. There was a smaller focus on terrain, but there were still some cool locations like the Aqua Raiders base and a shipwreck. Considering they only had 7 sets to make an impression, I'd say they did a decent job. But in 2011, they went deeper. I'd say Atlantis might be LEGO's most beloved underwater theme, if not at least in the same ballpark as Aquazone. People go nuts for this one. It's the same thing as Aqua Raiders, but with a far more distinct feel that appealed to old and new LEGO fans. The vehicles had a lot of great features, including transformations. What's impressive about these isn't so much how intricate they are, but how efficient they are. This base compressing into a sub is a great example. The crazy retro look breathed new life into the M-Tron community, inspiring mocks galore. The creatures, while essentially being even more exaggerated versions of the same marine animals as last time, still had a unique aesthetic of their own. They were mostly black, but they had several secondary colors on the underside that varied from one to the next. It kept them from being repetitive like the Mars mission aliens, and they had weird patterns etched on them like they were artificially created. And the new species introduced were more exotic, including a turtle and a gulper eel, I think. Then you had merfolk, with crazy fish heads giving these minifigs their own surprisingly strong presence. As far as I can tell, these may not be Atlanteans themselves, just something that took over before you could come along. While it was mainly a vehicle-focused theme, there were a few terrain pieces that are just unprecedented. I like the use of those tentacles as kelp. You could make a forest out of those. There were a good amount of sets in year 1, but only a few after that. Yeah, like I said in episode 3, man, a lot of callbacks in this one. This is one of those themes that petered out rather pitiably, but the later sets were nice. I personally don't think the switch from trans green to trans yellow was quite as striking as much as I love that color, but they're still beautiful builds, and I guess this is how a second year of Divers might have looked. By my beard. I forgot how bad LEGO's facial animations were back then.
You catch a glimpse of total blackness. Total blackness.
And they're writing. Also, there's another dead Aqua Raider. Congratulations, you almost found Atlantis. There's only one more line to see after this, 2015's Deep Sea Explorers, a sub-theme of LEGO City. And this truly is just Divers remade, which I think is great. This is something LEGO does a lot with City nowadays, is bring back their more experimental, short-lived themes from the old days with all those modern pieces. It gives today's kids a chance to experience the same joys we did, and gives us old fogies a chance to re-experience that. It's an interesting mix of things. They can't dedicate entire lines to smaller projects like that, that anymore. But they can't just let City become the same cops and robbers, firefighters, or construction workers all the time. So reincarnating lines like this, however briefly, and peppering smaller waves of them here and there is a nice compromise. I mean, they just revived their Arctic sets under the City banner for the second time. We'll see the ocean again someday. And all you younger builders who missed out or are just now getting into LEGO will have your chance to see that other world that's drawn people like me in so deep. Until then, there's always Bricklink. That's it for today. Please also consider supporting my books if you guys are interested. Next episode will be different. See you then.
Calling base. We've spotted a crystal. Send in the security box.
Prepare for sub-launch.
Leaving base.
Warning, aquasharks in area.
Hurry up with that box. Box delivered. Hey, the aquasharks are searching the box. Yeah, but did they get the crystal?